Let me tell you something. There comes a moment in every person's life when being comfortable with the same old story becomes more painful than changing the story itself. And that moment, that spark, is disgust. I'm not talking about being annoyed, not frustrated, not irritated. I'm talking about that deep, honest conversation with yourself when you say disgust creates decision is one of the most powerful truths in personal transformation, because real change rarely comes from comfort. It comes from that moment when something inside you snaps and you finally say, I'm not living like this anymore. Disgust isn't negative when it pushes you toward a higher version of yourself. It becomes the emotional trigger that forces you to confront what you've been avoiding, deny yourself the easy way out, and finally step into the responsibility you've been postponing. Most people don't change because they don't hurt enough yet. They complain, but they don't commit. They wish, but they don't decide. They want more, but they tolerate less. Disgust breaks that tolerance. It's the moment when you're tired of waking up with regret, tired of repeating excuses that sound good but feel empty, tired of seeing your potential sit unused while your fears drive your decisions. Disgust is the point where your pride wakes up. Something inside you says, enough is enough, and that single moment often becomes more powerful than years of wishing and waiting combined. It forces you to see your situation clearly without sugarcoating it, and clarity creates courage. When you're disgusted with your own patterns, you stop negotiating with your weakness. You stop trying to justify habits that don't serve you. You stop explaining why you're stuck and start figuring out how to get unstuck. Think about it. Most breakthroughs in life don't happen on calm, peaceful days. They happen the moment you feel so fed up with your own limitations that doing nothing becomes more painful than doing the hard work of changing. Disgust creates that emotional pressure. It shakes you out of autopilot and breaks the attachment you have to comfort. It forces you to choose not someday, not next week, but right now. And the decision born out of disgust is different from a casual decision. It carries weight, it carries urgency, it carries conviction. It pushes you to act with intention, not impulse. When you make a decision from disgust, you no longer worry about people's opinions because staying the same bothers you more than being judged. You no longer overthink the next step because the idea of staying stuck feels heavier than the fear of moving forward. Disgust creates decision because it replaces the maybe mindset with absolute resolve. It shuts the door on turning back. It removes the option of quitting. It ignites a fire that motivation alone can't sustain. Motivation feels good, but disgust awakens discipline. Motivation can fade, but disgust forces follow through. When you are truly disgusted, you don't need to be inspired, you need to act. And you do, because something inside you has changed. Your standards rise, your excuses die, your vision sharpens, and your decisions reflect the person you're becoming, not the person you were trying to escape. Your breaking point becomes your turning point because that moment where everything feels heavy, overwhelming, and almost unbearable is often the exact moment life forces you to make a choice. Stay down or rise with a new level of strength. A breaking point isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've reached the limit of the life you no longer want to carry. It's where the pressure builds so intensely that standing still is no longer an option. When people talk about transformation, they often describe the achievements, the victories, the success. But the truth is, the real shift usually begins in the dark moments where you're questioning everything, where the old version of you can't survive anymore. A breaking point strips away pride, excuses, and false comfort. It leaves you face to face with the raw truth of your situation. You can't hide from it. You can't sugarcoat it. You can't pretend it's not happening. Those moments force you to examine the gap between who you are and who you could be. They expose what you've been tolerating, ignoring, or denying. And as painful as they are, they become the emotional fuel that pushes you toward change. When life hits you hard enough, you stop caring about what people think. You stop protecting your weaknesses. You stop defending the habits that hold you back. And suddenly, the pressure that once felt like it was destroying you becomes the force that reshapes you. A turning point never begins with comfort. It begins with an internal disruption. Maybe it's the moment you realize you've been wasting time. Maybe it's the moment your excuses finally sound embarrassing to you. Maybe it's when you lose something you thought you could never lose: a job, a relationship, an opportunity, a piece of yourself. That loss hurts, but it also reveals what needs to be rebuilt. Pain has a way of clearing out everything that isn't real. It forces you to decide what truly matters. And when you make a decision from that level of clarity, it changes the direction of your life. Your breaking point becomes your turning point because it forces you to step into a version of yourself you didn't know you were capable of becoming. When you reach that emotional edge, fear loses power. Comfort loses its appeal. The old lifestyle loses its grip. You realize you can't go back to who you were. You've outgrown the mindset, the habits, and sometimes even the environment that kept you stuck. That realization creates momentum. You start moving with a sense of urgency and purpose, not because someone motivated you, but because life demanded it. In those moments, you discover strength you never knew you had. You learn resilience you didn't know you needed. You develop discipline you used to run from. And slowly, the same moment that once felt like it was breaking you becomes the moment that built the foundation for everything you're about to become. That's why a breaking point isn't the end, it's the rebirth of someone stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever. Pain forces self-reflection because nothing makes you look at yourself more honestly than the moments when life hurts. When everything is going well, it's easy to overlook your flaws, ignore your habits, and avoid dealing with the deeper issues that quietly shape your life. Comfort hides the truth, but pain exposes it. Pain has a way of slowing you down, stripping away distractions, and placing a mirror right in front of you. It makes you confront the questions you've been running from, and it demands answers you can't avoid. In pain, your mind becomes clearer, your priorities become sharper, and your understanding of yourself becomes more real. When you're hurting, you start to ask questions you never asked before. Why am I feeling this way? What choices led me here? What patterns am I repeating? What am I holding on to that's holding me back? Pain pushes you to dig into the parts of your life that you've allowed to stay on autopilot for too long. It forces you to examine your relationships, your discipline, your goals, your faith, your self-worth. It makes you aware of the habits you've normalized, the people you've tolerated, and the standards you've lowered. That awareness isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. Pain becomes the teacher that comfort could never be. Self-reflection born from pain is deeper, more raw, and more transformative than any reflection you do casually. When you reflect from a place of peace, you think lightly. When you reflect from a place of pain, you think honestly. Pain removes the filters and excuses. It shows you exactly where you've been settling. It highlights the signs you ignored. It reveals the lessons you refused to learn until now. And that honesty becomes the foundation for meaningful change. Pain also humbles you. It makes you realize you're not as in control as you thought. It breaks down the walls of pride and reminds you that growth requires vulnerability. When you're hurting, you stop pretending to be strong in the wrong ways and start becoming strong in the right ways. You stop pretending you don't need help. You stop pretending everything is fine. You stop pretending you can do life in the same old patterns. Pain doesn't just force reflection, it forces surrender, the willingness to let go of what no longer serves you. Through pain, you begin to see what actually matters. You start appreciating what you once took for granted. You start valuing peace over approval, clarity over chaos, purpose over comfort. Pain sharpens your vision. It opens your eyes to the reality that something has to change, and that change begins within you. When you reflect from a place of pain, you don't analyze just to understand. You analyze to transform. Pain forces self-reflection because it creates the kind of silence where truth speaks louder. It slows the noise of the world so you can finally hear the voice within. And in that reflection, you don't just discover what hurt you, you discover who you're meant to become through it. Accountability over blame is the principle that separates those who grow from those who stay stuck. It's easy to point fingers, to blame circumstances, to blame people, to blame the system, to blame the past. Blame feels safe because it allows you to remain comfortable in your current position without taking responsibility for change. But blaming others keeps you powerless. Blame keeps you a victim. Accountability, on the other hand, shifts the power back into your hands. It's the acknowledgement that while you cannot control everything that happens to you, you are fully responsible for how you respond. It's the moment when excuses die and ownership begins, and it's in ownership that true transformation takes root. When you choose accountability over blame, you start to see life through a lens of control rather than victimhood. You realize that pointing fingers only distracts you from the action you need to take. Every time you blame someone or something, you give away your power to change your circumstances. Accountability means looking in the mirror, seeing your role in every outcome, and saying, "This is on me." I have to do better. I have to respond differently. It doesn't mean you ignore unfairness or pretend that hardships don't exist. It means you refuse to let those hardships define your trajectory or your mindset. It's the difference between complaining about the storm and learning to navigate through it. Accountability also requires courage. It requires you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. It forces you to admit where you fell short, where you made mistakes, and where your actions or inactions contributed to the problems you face. That kind of honesty is painful, but it is necessary for growth. Without it, you remain trapped in cycles of frustration, resentment, and stagnation. When you accept accountability, you break free from those cycles. You take control of the narrative, and with that control comes the ability to shape your future intentionally. Blame is passive. Accountability is active. Blame keeps you reacting. Accountability makes you proactive. When you stop blaming, you stop wasting energy on things outside your control. When you embrace accountability, you start focusing your energy on the things you can control: your decisions, your effort, your consistency, your attitude. You begin to make deliberate choices instead of waiting for life to hand you permission or validation. You begin to design your life rather than drift through it. Every action you take under accountability has purpose and direction because it stems from the understanding that your growth is your responsibility. Accountability over blame also transforms relationships. When you stop blaming others for your struggles, you stop projecting negativity onto them. You stop carrying grudges, resentments, and frustrations that only hold you back. Instead, you communicate honestly, take responsibility for your part, and create space for constructive solutions. You start attracting people who respect integrity, honesty, and maturity. You also inspire others to hold themselves accountable because your example shows that growth comes from owning your role in your life, not excusing it. Accountability doesn't just change your outcomes. It changes who you are while pursuing those outcomes. It turns obstacles into lessons, failures into opportunities, and setbacks into stepping stones. It empowers you to move forward with clarity, purpose, and unstoppable momentum. Commitment over motivation is the understanding that lasting change doesn't come from fleeting feelings, but from unwavering dedication. Motivation is powerful in the moment. It excites you, it pushes you, it inspires action, but it is unreliable. Motivation fluctuates based on your mood, your circumstances, and external influences. Some days it's high, and some days it's low. If you rely on motivation alone, your progress will be inconsistent, and your goals will remain distant dreams. Commitment, however, is different. Commitment is a decision to take action regardless of how you feel. It is a promise to yourself that no matter the obstacles, no matter the discomfort, no matter the lack of inspiration, you will persist. Commitment is what separates those who achieve from those who simply wish. When you choose commitment over motivation, you stop waiting for the perfect conditions to begin. You stop allowing the highs and lows of emotion to dictate your performance. You act because you have decided that your goals are non-negotiable, not because you feel like it. Commitment is what allows you to show up on days when you feel exhausted, discouraged, or uninspired. It is what drives consistency, and consistency is the engine of progress. Every small action taken in commitment compounds over time, creating momentum that motivation alone could never sustain. Motivation may light a spark, but commitment keeps the fire burning. Commitment over motivation also builds resilience. Life is full of setbacks, challenges, and disappointments, and motivation alone cannot carry you through those moments. Motivation fades when obstacles appear, but commitment endures. When you are committed, failure becomes a lesson rather than a reason to quit. Pain becomes a teacher rather than a signal to stop. You develop the mental toughness required to push through discomfort, to keep grinding when the reward is not immediate, and to maintain focus when distractions threaten to derail you. Commitment allows you to persist because your purpose is bigger than temporary feelings. It gives you a reason to rise every day, even when the odds are against you, and it forces you to act in alignment with your goals rather than in reaction to how you feel in that moment. Choosing commitment over motivation also transforms your habits. Motivation can get you started, but commitment keeps you consistent. Habits are formed through repetition, through showing up even when you don't feel like it. Commitment ensures that your actions are not sporadic, but intentional, deliberate, and persistent. Over time, these committed actions build skill, discipline, and character. Your identity begins to shift because you no longer define yourself by fleeting inspiration, but by consistent action. People respect and trust individuals who demonstrate commitment because commitment is a visible proof of integrity, discipline, and determination. Commitment over motivation teaches you that results are earned through effort, discipline, and perseverance, not fleeting emotions. It instills patience, focus, and an unshakable belief that progress is inevitable when you refuse to quit. It removes the dependency on feelings and external validation, replacing them with self-discipline, accountability, and a relentless drive to achieve. It turns dreams into plans, plans into actions, and actions into results. Ultimately, commitment over motivation is the bridge between who you are today and who you are determined to become. Raising your standards is one of the most powerful steps you can take toward transforming your life, because the level of your life is directly tied to the level of standards you hold for yourself. Too often, people accept mediocrity because it feels safe, comfortable, or familiar. They settle for less than they are capable of achieving because they've grown, accustomed to tolerating excuses, compromise, and half effort. But the moment you raise your standards, everything begins to change. Raising your standards is not about perfection. It's about refusing to accept what no longer serves you, refusing to allow yourself to remain in situations that stunt your growth, and refusing to settle for a version of life that is beneath your potential. It's a declaration that you deserve more and that you are willing to work for it. When you raise your standards, you start making decisions from a new perspective. You stop accepting toxic relationships, limiting beliefs, and unproductive habits. You begin to surround yourself with people who reflect the level of excellence you aspire to achieve. You no longer compromise your values for convenience or approval. Instead, you align your daily actions, choices, and commitments with the person you are determined to become. Raising your standards requires courage because it often means stepping away from comfort zones and confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself and your environment. It challenges you to examine where you've been settling and forces you to decide what you will no longer tolerate in your life. Raising your standards also elevates your expectations for performance, effort, and accountability. When your standards are low, you excuse failure, procrastination, and inconsistency. When your standards are high, excuses lose their power. You hold yourself to a higher level of discipline, focus, and persistence. You begin to demand more from yourself, not out of pride, but out of respect for your potential and your future. Every choice becomes intentional, and every action becomes purposeful. High standards create a framework for growth because they set the bar for what is acceptable and what is not, and that framework guides every decision you make. Raising your standards transforms your mindset. It teaches you that you are responsible for the quality of your life, and that settling is a choice, not a circumstance. It helps you see that achievement is not a matter of luck or talent alone, but of consistency, resilience, and the refusal to accept mediocrity. When you raise your standards, you begin to operate from a position of excellence rather than complacency. Your environment, your relationships, and your opportunities begin to shift to match the new level you have set for yourself. People are drawn to those who operate at a higher standard because energy, integrity, and excellence are magnetic qualities. Ultimately, raising your standards is about transformation from the inside out. It is a commitment to refuse less, to demand more, and to hold yourself accountable for becoming the person capable of achieving more. It reshapes your actions, your mindset, and your life trajectory because the moment you refuse to accept mediocrity, you stop being passive and start being intentional. It forces you to grow, to stretch, and to pursue excellence relentlessly. By raising your standards, you are creating a life that reflects your true potential, your worth, and your unwavering commitment to becoming the best version of yourself.